Imagine this. Two neighboring countries sharing one of the longest borders in the world. One is the most powerful nation on Earth. The other is fighting one of the most complex security crises in modern history. Every day across that border, drugs move north, weapons move south, and billions of dollars flow through an invisible system that never stops moving. Now here's the part that confuses many people. The United States has repeatedly offered stronger intervention to help Mexico fight organized crime. In some cases, even suggesting direct military involvement. But Mexico's response has stayed consistent. A firm no to foreign troops, a firm no to external military operations on its soil, and a firm insistence on one word: sovereignty. So the real question is not just what is happening, but why does Mexico refuse the kind of help many assume would solve the problem? And the answer is not simple. Because once you look deeper into history, politics, and the structure of the problem itself, you begin to see a reality that is far more complicated than most headlines suggest. In 2006, Mexico launched a major national security strategy against powerful criminal organizations. It was seen as a turning point, a moment where the country would finally regain control over regions affected by violence and instability. At first, it looked promising. High-profile targets were captured. Military and federal forces expanded their presence. And the message was clear. The state was fighting back. But over time, something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing, these organizations changed. They fragmented. Smaller groups formed from larger ones, and competition between them increased in unpredictable ways. For many communities, the result was not stability, but ongoing cycles of conflict that evolved rather than ended. And this is where experts often disagree. Some argue enforcement reduced certain threats. Others argue fragmentation created new challenges that are harder to track and contain. But almost everyone agrees on one point. The situation did not simply end, it adapted. And that idea becomes important later. Because adaptation is not just a detail, it is the entire problem. One of the biggest misunderstandings is thinking this is just about individual groups or gangs. In reality, many analysts describe it more like a decentralized illegal economy. A system with multiple revenue streams. Not just one product, but many. Illegal trafficking networks, extortion systems, fuel theft operations, money laundering structures, and more. What makes this especially difficult is not just the scale, but the integration into everyday economic activity in some regions. This is why many experts argue you cannot treat this as a traditional battlefield problem, because it behaves less like an army and more like a constantly shifting network. Now pause for a second, because this changes everything. If the problem is a network, then removing one part does not remove the system. It only reshapes it. And that brings us to a critical tension point. From the US perspective, the focus is often on supply chains moving north. The idea is simple. If illegal substances are stopped before they cross the border, the problem decreases. From Mexico's perspective, the issue is more complex. Because demand exists on the other side of the border. And without demand, the system weakens. So instead of a single shared strategy, what often emerges is a cycle of mutual blame. One side focuses on enforcement. The other focuses on demand. But neither side can solve the entire system alone. And that is where political tension grows. Because cooperation is necessary, but so is national autonomy. And that leads directly into the most sensitive part of the discussion. When Mexican leadership rejects foreign military involvement, it is not simply a rejection of cooperation. It is rooted in a long-standing principle: sovereignty. The idea that a nation must retain full control over its internal security decisions. For Mexico, this principle is shaped by historical memory and political experience. For the United States, the focus is often operational effectiveness and cross-border coordination. These two perspectives are not necessarily in direct opposition, but they are fundamentally different in philosophy. One prioritizes control of internal affairs. The other prioritizes rapid security intervention. And when those two priorities collide, the result is hesitation, limits, and carefully defined boundaries. But there is another layer to this discussion that is often overlooked, and this is where things become more complicated, not more certain. Here is where we move from facts into interpretation, and it is important to be clear. Different experts disagree on the causes and solutions. Some argue that stronger enforcement pressure reduces violence over time. Others argue that fragmentation leads to instability and unintended consequences. Some emphasize economic development. Others emphasize institutional reform. But almost all agree on one thing: there is no single, simple solution. Because this is not a traditional conflict. It involves economics, demand, geography, enforcement, and governance all at once. And when multiple systems overlap, solutions become complicated. Now here's the key question. If every approach has limitations, what does winning even look like? And that question is still being debated today. Because every action creates reactions. Every enforcement shift changes the structure. And every policy adjustment reshapes the landscape. Which is why this problem has lasted for so long. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything changes what comes next. So after decades of cooperation attempts, political debates, security operations, and billions of dollars spent, the situation remains unresolved. And that brings us back to the original question. Why does Mexico refuse certain types of direct foreign intervention? The answer is not one sentence. It is a combination of history, sovereignty, political philosophy, and the reality that this problem is not simple to isolate. But perhaps the deeper question is not about refusal at all. Perhaps the real question is this: if multiple countries, strategies, and decades of effort have not fully solved it yet, then what does it actually take to solve a problem that keeps changing shape? Because in the end, this is not just a story about borders. It is a story about systems. And systems do not break easily. They evolve. And maybe that is the real reason this story is not over yet.